Rates remain stubbornly high in Central Australia as advocates renew calls for a transitional housing model for young people, known as Youth Foyer, to be established to tackle the issue. Youth Foyers are housing and support facilities for vulnerable people aged 16 to 24 and provide a safe and stable place to live for up to 2 years, where young people can access wraparound support while they study or search for work. Elsie Lange spoke with NT Shelter's Annie Taylor and learned about the model and why it might work in Central Australia.
A youth foyer is a bricks and mortar response to youth homelessness. It is a transitional housing model, so a medium-term housing model which is designed to help vulnerable young people who are typically aged about 16 to 24 years old, and it combines safe, stable and independent accommodation with on-site links to education, training institutions and life skills so that young people can really successfully transition into adulthood.
It's something that I've heard the conditions in Alice Springs would be perfect for. Can you talk to me about that? Why would a youth foyer work well in a place like Alice Springs?
Well, look, Alice Springs has schools, it's got CDU, it's got employees, or employers, I should say, looking for workers. There are training options in Alice, but what it lacks is enough stable, medium-term options for young people, and that's part of what a foyer does. It's really about connecting housing with education and employment, but it's also intervening in disadvantage, and that's why the outcomes of foyers are really positive and quite different to having a young person enter the homelessness system, because, you know, young people do need to sometimes seek support from homelessness services, and when they do, the support they get is great. But, you know, a foyer is really about providing that stable base for about 2 years' time and connecting them with that ongoing stability. And if we're serious in the Northern Territory about reducing that long-term welfare dependency and reducing justice involvement and building a local workforce as well, it really needs to start with young people who are a really large part of the NT's homelessness stats.
I'd love to understand how you think a youth foyer might support some of those young people who are, you know, people who are coming into contact with the justice system, for example. How could that support those young people?
Well, look, foyers aren't the silver bullet, and they're not for every young people. And I do always hasten to say that, because the fact is that in Alice Springs, we probably need multiple programs for the cohort of young people that require support. About 3 years ago, NT Shelter and the Office of the Children's Commissioner did a report where we spoke to a bunch of young people in Alice Springs about their varied experiences of homelessness, and we heard different things. And one of the things we heard was that a foyer or a foyer-like program would be great for Central Australia. But we also heard that young people need more communication about the services that exist and are out there. But they need to know, young people need to know that these services exist and where they can go. So, I think what's important to note is that, young people, if they don't have anywhere stable, they don't feel like they can go to a stable place at night, and they don't feel like they're getting that support, then they are more likely to engage in the justice system. They are more likely to engage with the healthcare system, and that's the sad fact of youth homelessness. It's hugely expensive. There are financial and social reasons why it is smarter to, deal with youth homelessness rather than just let this really traumatic experience happen to young people. Young people are more likely to re-engage with these systems, these systems across government over and over again throughout their lives unless we intervene early. And the lifetime cost to government, federal and territorial state, of supporting a young person who has accessed the homelessness system is estimated to be about $386,000. So it's hugely expensive, and there are so many reasons why we need to be intervening early.
What has changed, or if anything has changed, since you've done that research in 2023 in terms of how youth homelessness manifests itself in Central Australia? Yeah,
so we did some work, some follow-up work this year, and unfortunately the answer is that not much has changed. The drivers of youth homelessness largely remain the same. Overcrowding really remains entrenched, and that's whether you're looking at remote communities or you're looking at our urban centres. And young people continue to experience homelessness at rates far greater than the rest of Australia. So the demand for services continues to just exceed the capacity of services. So The data is telling a story of a system that is really stuck in place. And something that young people told us consistently in the original report was that they wanted more youth-specific accommodation in Central Australia, and a youth foyer is exactly the kind of response that they were talking about. So when we look at the findings from 2023 and compare them to where we are today, the case for a foyer has only become stronger. The gap is still there, and a foyer is a really practical way to start closing that gap and changing things.
What kind of work has already begun in this space for young people setting up a youth foyer, and what kind of outcomes would a youth foyer have in Central Australia?
Well, in terms of the outcomes, youth foyers work, and across Australia they've seen over 80% of young people exiting foyers into safe and stable accommodation, and most of those young people are going into the private market, which is that redirection we need because the NT doesn't have the social housing to continue to support the amount of people who need social housing. And 4 of 5 participants engaged in education or employment when they exit a youth foyer. So you can really see that there's positive outcomes for foyers across the country. Earlier this year, NT Shelter and Anglicare NT launched the Northern Territory's first Foyer Invest working group. So we've brought together representatives from a range of Aboriginal organisations and housing providers, and the purpose of that group is to drive advocacy for foyers across various urban centres, including Alice Springs, and also develop a 10-year vision for how foyers can work in the Northern Territory, noting that our context is different. You know, we're not Sydney, we're not Brisbane, we're different than other jurisdictions. So we want to make sure that the foyer model can suit us, and that, it's going to suit a place like Alice Springs. So we're a big cohort of organisations who are working really strongly towards that.
NT Shelter's Annie Taylor speaking with our reporter Elsie Lange about the renewed calls for a transitional housing model for young people experiencing housing stress and homelessness in Alice Springs. 18 minutes